The period of Rome's rule, or Byzantium as the German historians named it, which lasted 1,123 years, made this the longest continuous empire in history. From its establishment, with the construction of Constantinople in the year 330, until the fall of the city itself under Ottoman rule in the year 1453, Rome represents the peak of the rise of Christianity as a state religion. After the Great Schism of the year 1054, Christianity split into two parts that we know today as Orthodoxy and Catholicism. All later divisions drew their sources precisely from the first schism. Constantine's Christianity, which was framed by church councils, especially the one in Nicaea in the year 325, established Christianity not only as a state religion, but also as a spiritual institution that would determine the future course of spiritual thought. The Church as an institution will in the future serve emperors and kings more than God. And because of this, those empires and kingdoms will decline and disappear. Wars between Christian nations will be some of the bloodiest in history. Within the Catholic part of Europe, the Inquisition was born, which has remained a symbol of the darkest part of the Middle Ages to this day. The Serbian Empire reached its zenith during the time of Emperor Dušan, who elevated the kingdom to the level of an empire and expanded its borders to 3 seas. During the reign of Emperor Dušan, the Peach Patriarchate was established as the supreme church authority among the Serbs. Although in the year 1219, Saint Sava founded the Serbian Archbishopric in Žiča. In Serbian lands, with the establishment of the Patriarchate of Peć, the autocephaly of the Serbian Church was elevated to the highest level. This was necessitated by the fact that the kingdom was elevated to the level of an empire. And Dušan himself, by conquering large parts of Rome or Byzantium, was crowned as the emperor of the Serbs and Greeks in Skopje on the 16th of April, 1346. Emperor Dušan made this decision even before that, after the conquest of the city of Ser, known today by its Hellenized name Ceres, located in the hills above the Aegean Sea, which was then called Belomor, and the city is located not far from Mount Athos. The invasion of the Turks began from Central Asia under the pressure of the Mongols, and after the establishment of the first state in eastern Anatolia by the Seljuks in the 11th century, the conquests proceeded towards Asia Minor and later the Balkans. These conquests significantly changed the entire way of life that had lasted for a whole millennium in this region. Besides the change in lifestyle, there was also a change in religion. As the traditional nest of Christianity and later Orthodoxy fell under the impact of Islam, the new religion from the East, Islam, first with the Arabs and then with the Turks, took over the entire Mediterranean territory and assumed control of all parts of the former Roman Empire. Although the position of today's historiography is that Islam was not imposed by force on conquered peoples, it is quite clear that those who remained in Christianity were doomed to live as second-class citizens. In addition, Islam itself prescribed a special tax, jizya, for all non-Muslims, which Christians, Jews, and all others who were stubborn enough not to want to abandon their faith were obligated to pay. This sequence of events led to the division of the Serbian Empire after Dušan's death, and significantly weakened the central authority. Local dukes and princes rise according to the old Slavic custom, but individually, they are not strong enough to oppose the incoming enemy. After the defeat at the Battle of Maritsa in the year 1371, it was quite clear that the fate of the Serbian states would soon be severely tested. The Battle of Kosovo in 1389 showed that before the retreat of the Turkish army, after the battle and the death of Sultan Murad, could not resist the strong power of the Ottoman Empire for a long time. After all the battles and the great suffering of individual rulers, it was no longer possible to gather a large army to oppose the Turks, who spread their territory to all sides, from Asia to Africa, and not only to the Balkans. Thus, the Turks entered every battle with a new army, which they gathered from all the lands they had conquered in the meantime. In order to bring about a national invasion, possible rebellions, and the uprising of the Serbian people, which was still alive, especially in the Brdo and hard-to-reach Balkan regions, the Turks decided to put an end to the Pečka Patriarchy as a symbol of what the Serbian state represented, in the hope that the entire population in the following years, under difficult living conditions and taxes, will slowly switch to Islam. However, the Serbian people showed much more desire than expected, and in many regions, Turkey has very difficultly established its real power, beyond cities and fortresses. The Serbian government, mainly in order to preserve the benefits, recognized the Turkish government and sent troops to fight on the side of the Turks. It is known that Lazar's son, Prince Stefan Lazarević, participated in the war campaigns on the side of the Sultan. Stefan particularly stood out in the battle at Angora in 1402, where, after the defeat of the Ottomans, he was honored by Tamerlan himself, who, having defeated the Ottomans, was amazed by the fighting and the heroism of Serbian knights. However, without a state and without a patriarchal people, he was mostly left alone. The influence of the Vatican and Istanbul was greater and greater, so a good part of the people sought refuge in the change of faith or relocation to regions that were not on the border of the Ottoman Empire and Christian countries, because that position guaranteed new wars and death. The Turkish Empire, as a multi-ethnic, quickly realized that it had to remain open for the promotion of the best people in the entire empire, regardless of their ethnic affiliation, but with the condition to convert to Islam. This is how people from all parts of the empire came to many key places, from Central Asia and all the way to North Africa and the Balkans. Some sultans even had the title of Khan, which speaks of their Asian origin. The fall of Constantinople, under the rule of the Turks in 1453, brings a new phase in the development of the Ottoman Empire, because this city was the dream of all rulers of the then world. The largest Christian church, Hagia Sophia, was transformed into a mosque, and the royal court of the Christian rulers will become the royal capital of the Turkish sultans. It is interesting that the Turkish sultans, after the fall of Constantinople, also carried the title of the Roman emperor, because they considered themselves the followers of the tradition of this magnificent city. Along with the sultan, the government was led by a Grand Vizier. It was the function of the executive authorities, and the most competent officials from the entire empire chose for it. This is somewhat similar to the current function of the prime minister in modern countries. In fact, the real creator of all ideas, both the sultan's and his own, was the Grand Vizier. The Turks realized that the best way to create an elite military unit was to take the most mature children from the subjugated regions and to educate them in accordance with the doctrines of the empire and Islam. This tradition was known even earlier in history, and many empires used it. In our regions, it is called danak, in blood. That is how the Janikari were created, an elite military unit made up of the best young men from the entire empire, which was trained according to the strictest rules and was the main shelter of the Sultan, both in internal patrols and on the battlefield, in the conquest of new territories. Such conditions in the empire were fertile ground for some of the taken Serbian boys to break through to the very top of the power in the imperial city now called Istanbul. At the top gate of the imperial court in Bosphorus, under the title of Grand Vizier, came two Serbs, who, although in the service of the Ottoman Empire, did everything to reopen the Patriarchate of Pečka. The first of them was Rustem Pasha Sokolović, born from Skradin in Dalmatia, born around 1500. He was often called Dalmat Rustem Pasha. Rustem Pasha was a Grand Vizier in two gates. The first time, from November 28, 1544 to October 6, 1553. And the second time, from September 29, 1555 to July 10, 1561. Over 15 years, Rustem Pasha was the first man of the empire, right behind the Sultan. To strengthen his position, Rustem Pasha married the daughter of Sultan Süleyman the Great, Ihurem, who was called Mihrima, which in Turkish means from the sun and the moon. And so he became the son-in-law and member of the royal family. Rustem Pasha was faced with a great challenge at the very beginning of his reign because he faced great inflation, but he successfully solved this problem and thus gained even greater trust in the Sultan himself. In 1552, he was appointed the supreme military commander in the campaign against Persia. What is very important is that during the time of Rustem Pasha Sokolović, the idea of establishing the Pečka Patriarchy appears again. This fact says that Rustem Pasha did not forget his origin, and that he tried to help the Serbian people in every way. This idea also corresponded to Sultan Süleyman, who wanted the Serbs to be on his side in the upcoming wars. So, along with being a patriarch, he wanted the Serbs to have some kind of autonomy and thus prevent a greater transition of the Serbs to the Catholic faith. Behind Rustem Pasha is one of the most beautiful mosques on the coast of Bosphorus. On the very edge of the Golden Horn, namely at the port of Eminon, the largest port and main port here in Istanbul, behind us is the Rustem Pasha Sokolović Mosque, one of the most famous people in the history of the Ottoman Empire, a great vizier, even during the reign of Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent, Rustem Pasha Sokolović. He was a great vizier at the time when Mehmed Pasha Sokolović became the third vizier. He was a great vizier in two ways. One of the most important people during the Ottoman Empire. As you can see behind our beds, there is his mosque dedicated to him. And the most important thing in the history of the Serbian people. In his time, the revitalization of the Pečka Patriarchy began, which was closed in 1994, but on the initiative of Rustem Pasha Sokolović, who was born in Kradin, in Dalmatia. The sources claim that he was born in Sarajevo or somewhere else, but without any speculation, we will stick to what is the official position of history, and that is that he was born in Kradin, in Dalmatia. This mosque, the Rustem Pasha Sokolović Mosque, was built in 1561 and completed in 2 years. As you can see, it has only one minaret. Rustem Pasha Sokolović was born in 1500 in Skradin, and he was a great vizier. It is known in history that he was declared a great general and that he led the march to Persia. Rustem Pasha Sokolović will remain known as one of the most important personalities in the history of the Ottoman Empire, especially during his greatest expansion and during the reign of Süleyman the Great. The two men who led the empire and who were the most important at that time were Rustem Pasha Sokolović and Mehmed Pasha Sokolović. It is believed that Rustem Pasha Sokolović was one of the richest people in the empire. His death alone is a mystery. According to legend, he was in the fight of princes and the successor of Suleiman the Great. Selim II and Bayezid stood on Selim's side, which later cost him his life. Not long after that, Sokoli Mehmed Pasha arrives at the position of Grand Vizier, or as we know him, Mehmed Pasha Sokolović, born as Bahika Nenadić in the village of Sokolovići near Rudo in Herzegovina and taken as a child to Turkey. He advanced quickly and successfully, completed all schools. The best among the best from the Janissaries were chosen for court service, and among them, Mehmed stood out from the very beginning. Mehmed Pasha participates from an early age in military campaigns, and particularly stands out in the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, and in the First Siege of Vienna in 1529. After unsuccessful wars against the Habsburgs and Persians, Suleiman turns to organizing the state of the empire in order to establish mechanisms of governance and to prevent potential rebellions, which were frequent in the empire throughout history. This created an opportunity for Mehmed Pasha to engage in administrative affairs, initially at the imperial court in Edirne. In 1534, Mehmed Pasha arrives at Topkapi, where he works in the presence of Suleiman the Magnificent, who is also known as Kanuni or the lawgiver. He received this name due to the establishment of legislation and the entire state apparatus during his time. After a long tenure in imperial service and the death of Rustem Pasha, Mehmed Pasha becomes the second vizier, and after 4 years, the Grand Vizier. In the meantime, he establishes connections with his family in Herzegovina. We are in front of the Mehmed Pasha Sokolović Mosque in Istanbul, on one of the most beautiful parts on the European side, which is therefore adjacent to the Bosphorus, overlooking the sea. At that time, of course, this was an empty space. Now it is surrounded by many streets and many buildings. But Mehmed Pasha Sokolović is remembered as a great builder. He left his mark not only around the world, but also here in the very center of the empire. That is, in Istanbul. Of course, the construction was carried out in the year 1571 by Mimar Sinan, the most famous builder of the Ottoman Empire. And interestingly, during his lifetime, we already know that Mehmed Pasha Sokolović made the bridge on the Drina, Goat Bridge, in Sarajevo, the bridge on the Žepa, Arslanagić Bridge in Trebinje. Thus, he did not forget his Herzegovina. He built a lot in his Herzegovina, but also around the world. Mehmed Pasha Sokolović built this beautiful structure. Unfortunately, filming inside is not allowed. But I will show you just this plateau to illustrate how magnificent it looked at that time and how it is truly a brilliant object. During the time of Mehmed Pasha Sokolović and also during the time of Rustem Pasha Sokolović, the Pech Patriarchate once again became a patriarchate after 94 years, which just speaks to how aware they were of their Serbian origin. Beside this mosque, Mehmed Pasha Sokolović also built a church in his village of Sokolovići near Rudo. His brother, Ivan Sokolović, became the Serbian patriarch. From that, there is much. The dilemma whether he was his biological brother, but regarding the Sokolovićs were not known not only during the time of Mehmed Pasha Sokolović, but even before him. There were Sokolovići that existed at the courtyard. With his arrival, he connected the family and brought them to Ohrid, therefore his family, and in Timișoara, and in many other places, there were many Sokolovici at that time in the court and in the authority of the Ottoman Empire. So, one of the most notable places in Istanbul that must be visited. It's a bit tucked away, the streets are steep, but you will not really regret coming to this place to get acquainted with a beautiful piece of architecture of both the past and present, a gem of the city of Istanbul made by our Herzegovinian Mehmed Pasha Sokolović. In the year 1545, he becomes the admiral of the fleet. In the year 1551, with the title of Beylerbey, he conquers Temesvar from the Habsburgs. In 1557, he grants permission for the restoration of the Patriarchate of Peć and appoints his relative Makarije Sokolović as the Patriarch. On June 28, 1565, Suleiman appoints him as Grand Vizier, where he will be for the next 14 years. The Battle of Shigetvar, on the 5th of September 1566, is also remembered when the Sultan dies. And Mehmed Pasha hides his death for the morale of the army, and even, although already dead, carries him through the battlefield in a carriage as if he were alive. After Suleiman, Selim II ascends the throne, who, not being involved in state management, transfers all authority to Mehmed Pasha, who thus gains almost unlimited power. With two magnificent mosques in Istanbul, Mehmed Pasha built a large number of structures both in the empire itself and in his homeland of Herzegovina. The majority of those structures were built by the famous Mimar Sinan, who was born in the year 1490 in the Plaza Girnas, near the city of Kayseri, in an Armenian Orthodox family. On October 11th, 1579 in Istanbul, Mehmed Pasha was killed by a dervish. The most famous structures in our region are certainly the bridge in Visegrad, which is the title of the novel by our Nobel laureate Ivo Andrić, the bridge on the Drina, the Arslanagić Bridge in Trebinje, the Vizier's Bridge in Podgorica, and Goat's Bridge in Sarajevo. Dubrovnik Bojan Marin Držić wrote about him, a man of our blood and our language. We are in Istanbul, in the old part of the city, in the immediate vicinity of the Sultan Eyüp Mosque. Behind me is the tomb of Mehmed Pasha Sokolović, or as it's called here, Sokoli Mehmed Pasha. Of course, Mehmed Pasha Sokolović was born in Sokolovići, near Rudo in Old Herzegovina, with the birth name Bajika Nenadović, one of the most important rulers, probably the most significant name born in the Balkans after Emperor Dušan, and a man who governed a vast empire. Born in Sokolovići in 1505 near Rudo, and later taken by the Janissaries at the age of 16. In Liadrine, where he studied for 13 years, he quickly advanced after that. By the year 1543, he became the third vizier of the Ottoman Empire, and then became the governor of all of Rumelia. Rumelia is the part of the Roman Empire that remained from Romea, located in the European part. Thus, the area of Bulgaria, Serbia, present-day Macedonia, and Turkey. After that, he becomes the admiral of the fleet and then achieves the highest rank possible after the sultan, namely the Grand Vizier. He becomes the Grand Vizier in the year 1565, and until the 11th of October, 1579, until his death, he held that position for a full 15 years. So, 15 years as the Grand Vizier of the largest known empire of his time. He was killed on the 11th of October, 1579, when he was deceitfully murdered by a dervish who brought him a letter he was supposed to read. So, besides this imposing mausoleum behind me, there is also a madrasa, actually a school founded by Mehmed Pasha Sokolović, and it's as if fate decided for him to rest here in his Herzegovina, where he was born, under an old fig tree that we can see here, which has been growing here for years. Even back then, the fact that the Herzegovinians were inclined towards nepotism is evident as Mehmed Pasha appointed his cousin Makarije Sokolović to the throne of the Serbian Patriarch. The Patriarchate of Peć experienced its golden age, and for 30 years the Sokolović family was at its head, from 1557 to 1587. The first was Makarije Sokolović, from 1557 to 1571, who is also mentioned on the inscription of the church in Gruja as a bishop. Makarije's nephew, Antonije Sokolović, was the patriarch from 1571 for the next 4 years, coming to that position from the role of the Metropolitan of Herzegovina. The next was Gerasim Sokolović, from 1575 to 1586. Previously, he held the position of Archbishop of Ohrid. And finally, Savatije Sokolović was the Patriarch for only 1 year, from 1586. And before that, He was a monk of the Trebinje monastery. According to the inscription in the Church of the Assumption of the Virgin in the Piva monastery from 1572, he was the Herzegovinian metropolitan. In the Tronosha monastery, there is a chronicle from that time in Old Church Slavonic which reads, "From his brother, the great Turkish vizier with the imperial decree renewed the monasteries and churches." Historian Gerlach also recorded this. In September of the year 1500, 1974, the son of Pasha's brother Mehmed was appointed Archbishop of Bulgaria, and during the ceremony in Istanbul, prayers were read by the patriarchs of Constantinople and Alexandria. The newly appointed archbishop had under him 40 bishops and was seated in Ohrid, a city between Epirus and Serbia, and 10 days away from Edirne.